9 years ago, at the age of 38, I went through a divorce from my husband Nick, who was 40 at the time. We had been married for 3 years, and he had been a good husband until a significant misunderstanding led him to leave me. Within days, he served me with divorce papers without giving me an opportunity to explain the truth. Hurt and bewildered, I didn't contest the divorce. I simply let him go. I used to be a housewife, and on one fateful day, Nick unexpectedly walked in to find my ex-boyfriend Joe, also 38, at the house with me. The three of us knew each other from college, and Joe and I had dated for only 3 months before I realized my true feelings for Nick. Joe had come over to invite us to his upcoming wedding in a few months. Nothing suspicious was happening. However, Nick assumed the worst, left without a word, and even blocked all communication channels. Despite my attempts to explain and reach out, Nick drove away and cut off all contact. Devastated, I spent the next 2 days in a state of panic and tears. Joe also tried to explain, but even he was blocked. I believed Nick's anger would subside, and he would return, allowing me to clarify everything. Unfortunately, that never happened, and a few days later, Nick filed for divorce. Feeling helpless, I decided not to fight for my marriage, and as the divorce proceedings began, I moved in with a friend until I could establish my independence. It took time, but I eventually got my life back on track, securing a job and moving into my own apartment. Though angry and hurt by Nick's actions, I chose to focus on rebuilding my life. Even after the divorce was finalized, I was content with the little I gained from it. I attended Joe's wedding, reconnecting with college friends, while Nick remained absent as expected. Life took an unexpected turn when I met Chris, a 40-year-old man, at the wedding. Although sparks flew, I held back due to my recent divorce. We exchanged numbers, but didn't connect for a while. A year later, in a better mental state, I encountered Chris again at a work event. 2 years into dating, we got married, and another year later, we welcomed our daughter. Now, almost 5 years since my divorce from Nick, I've evolved into a new person. Despite moving on, I was recently shocked when Nick, after all these years, appeared at my doorstep, unannounced a few days ago. The impact of his unexpected return still lingers, leaving me in a state of disbelief. I never figured out how he managed to locate me, and truth be told, I didn't bother investigating later on. It was a weekend, and my husband and I were both home with our daughter when the doorbell unexpectedly rang. My astonishment peaked when I opened the door to find Nick standing there, holding a bouquet of roses, and smiling as if the past 9 years hadn't happened. Before I could fully process the surreal situation, he began explaining that a few weeks ago, he learned from a friend that Joe was married to someone else, not me. He claimed to have realized he had overreacted back then and wanted a second chance, asking for forgiveness. I was at a loss for words. The absurdity of him divorcing me over a misunderstanding years ago, without seeking the truth, was baffling. Now, after 9 years of silence, he believed he could waltz back into my life and ask for a second chance, the very thing he had denied me back then. That chance. While he continued talking, I stared at him in silence, contemplating my next move. I wanted to slam the door in his face, but that wouldn't suffice. So, opting for a more impactful response, I instructed him to wait and return to the living room where my husband and daughter were waiting. Without time for explanations, I scooped up my daughter, motioned for Chris to follow, and headed back to the front door. You can imagine the scene that unfolded. Nick was visibly horrified as I approached him with my daughter in my arms and my husband behind me. I smiled and informed him that he was a bit too late to request a second chance now, asking him to leave. After a brief moment of silence, he turned and hastily retreated to his car without uttering another word. Satisfied with my actions, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me for years. Once he was gone, I sat Chris down, recounted the encounter with Nick, and we shared a good laugh over the audacity of his belief that I would take him back without question after what he had done to me 9 years ago. I couldn't fathom why he thought it was a good idea to spring this surprise on me without doing any research first. A glance at any of my social media accounts would have revealed that I was now married with a daughter. However, I suppose he couldn't access them due to my privacy settings. Even then, he could have reached out to our old friends to find out what I was up to. Chris believes he's so self-centered that he assumed I would have waited around for him after he left, hoping that he'd come back someday. It sounds like a pretty accurate assessment of his character, even though Chris has never conversed with Nick. It's been a few days since the encounter, and I hoped he would leave me alone. Yet this morning, he messaged me on Facebook from a new account, expressing how hurt he was by my actions. He claimed he genuinely wanted to apologize for the past, but felt I had made a mockery of the situation. He still feels remorse for his past actions, but believes I owe him an apology for trying to humiliate him. AITA for what I did to Nick. Update 1. I decided not to respond to Nick's message. He didn't deserve even an ounce of my sympathy or forgiveness, let alone an apology. My husband was right. Nick assumed I'd still be waiting for him and would readily accept him once he was ready to come back. He had always been self-centered, a trait I had overlooked before marrying him. There were red flags I ignored, like his discomfort with me being around other guys, even just as friends. He convinced me to quit my job and be a housewife, claiming he didn't trust anyone else to take care of our home. Despite sacrificing for him, he didn't give me a chance to explain during the divorce. I always felt Nick was excessively jealous of Joe, my first boyfriend in college. Despite being loyal, he never trusted me. After our divorce, it took me a long time to recover and give love a second chance. Some say I jumped from one relationship to another too quickly, and perhaps it's true. However, I'm glad I took that leap of faith because now I have the best husband and a beautiful daughter. I won't apologize to Nick, but I do owe him thanks. If he hadn't left me, I might still be stuck in an unhappy marriage. Update 2. I discovered a couple more details about Nick. It turns out he had deleted all his social media, and for the past few years, he had been living and working in Seoul. Consequently, he lost touch with old friends, including those from college. He returned just a month ago, got in touch with a friend who knew about Joe's marriage but not mine, and that's how he ended up on my doorstep. It's still strange that he chose to approach me after almost a decade of no contact, but I've moved on from it. He hasn't messaged me since I ignored his last message, and I doubt he will. I also informed Joe about the incident, and he was just as shocked at Nick's audacity. My daughter asked about the man, but I didn't disclose the truth, stating he had the wrong address, which satisfied her curiosity. I don't plan on telling her unless she discovers it on her own, which seems unlikely. Update 3. After almost a week of no contact, Nick texted me again. I had forgotten to block him, which was my oversight, but I'm busy with work and not dwelling on it. In the text, he expressed a desire to meet, claiming he doesn't mind my husband and daughter and still wants to give our relationship another shot, insinuating that I'd be willing to cheat on my husband. This was ironic, considering he left me for that reason 9 years ago. I was disgusted by his text, blocked his number, and made it clear I wanted him to leave me alone. His delusional belief that I still have feelings for him is baffling, and I find his messages repulsive. Update 4. Some accusations suggest I'm still into Nick, which is not true. I hate him, and I believe it's a natural sentiment given our history. I shared the text with Chris because I value honesty in my marriage, and I would never jeopardize it by engaging in any such behavior. I love Chris more than anything and would never knowingly let Nick back into my life. I acknowledge my habit of not checking who's at the door when my husband is home, and I'm working on changing that. Nevertheless, I would never intentionally welcome Nick back into my life. I have no desire to have him back in my life, so it's disheartening that people are making such accusations. I hope this clarifies things. Update 5. Nick showed up again, but this time, I didn't open the door without checking first. Thankfully, my daughter was out with my husband. I was caught up with work, and when I realized it was Nick, I told him through the door that he needed to leave and wasn't welcome anymore. Despite my clear message, he refused to listen. He informed me he was in town for a couple more weeks before leaving for another country. stating that this would be convenient for us to get together. I was appalled by his suggestion to cheat on my husband and gave him 3 seconds to leave. When he didn't take it seriously, I called the police and they had to intervene. My daughter wasn't present, but I immediately informed my husband, Chris, who returned within an hour to ensure my well-being. I felt a bit shaken by the incident, but I'm okay. I don't know how he found out where I live. The friend who informed him about Joe being married wasn't close enough to me to know my marital status or address. I feel uneasy and uncomfortable in my own home. I'm fortunate that he's here for only a few more weeks, and I'm relying on that to keep him away. However, I'm more concerned about my daughter's safety. While he doesn't seem dangerous yet, I wouldn't put it past him. Even during the police intervention, he begged for one chance, showing signs of delusion. My husband and I are considering increasing security measures and seeking advice from his uncle, who works in the police, to address this unsettling situation. Update 6. I discovered how Nick traced me. One of my college friends gave my address to Nick's old friend without asking me first. She apologized several times, but I'm still upset about the situation. I haven't heard from Nick since the police escorted him away, but we're contemplating moving just in case he lied about his stay duration. Chris, and I don't want to take any risks, especially with our daughter attending school nearby. The situation has left me feeling paranoid and anxious. We're still contemplating a move, and ironically, the only thing holding us back is our daughter's love for our home. She has been upset since learning that we might have to leave. Any tips on how to handle this are welcome. Meanwhile, we're trying to find a solution that ensures our safety without compromising our current situation. Update 7. Nick has moved to Canada, confirmed by multiple sources. He's back on social media, and I've blocked the new number he used to text me. In his message, he claimed he believed something could have happened between us the day the police were involved, but implied I was too scared. He expressed a delusional hope that I would realize I still loved him, and that my husband was merely an obstacle. He even suggested adopting my daughter to demonstrate his devotion. I couldn't fathom such delusion, but at least he's gone. I'm relieved I no longer have to deal with this, and that we didn't have to move. My daughter's happiness in staying in her beloved home is what matters most. Knowing we're not in danger has lessened my worries, although we're keeping security measures in place for added reassurance. Chris and I read Nick's final message together, finding it ridiculous that he still believed I would want him after seeing my family. I shared the text with Joe, who had a similar reaction. I'm still not speaking to the friend who gave Nick my address, as her actions were irresponsible and unforgivable. Regardless, Chris and I are planning a vacation to the beach, my daughter's favorite place, to let off some steam. These past weeks have been incredibly stressful, and I feel like I've earned a break. Thanks for all the love and support, and stay tuned for more stories from Argo Relationships. My mother's furious voice echoed through the house, commanding me to leave. The intensity of her anger was palpable, and she gripped a kitchen knife tightly in her hand. In her rage, she disowned me, accusing me of being a burden and not contributing to the household expenses. The irony stung, as I contributed more than half of my $3,000 monthly income to the family. Desperate to make her understand, I attempted to explain, but she remained obstinate, brandishing the knife as a chilling display of her frustration. Cautiously, I kept my distance, mindful not to provoke her further. My name is Catherine, a 29-year-old systems engineer at a major corporation. My journey into this career was inspired by my father's love for computers. Despite my successful career, a sudden turn of events shook our lives. My father, the source of my inspiration, suffered a subarachnoid hemorrhage, leading to immediate surgery. Although the operation was successful, the aftermath hinted at lasting effects, raising concerns about our financial stability without his income. While I dedicatedly juggled my demanding job and caregiving responsibilities, my mother's priorities shifted. Instead of offering support, she focused on my father's ability to return to work during his recovery. Witnessing his struggles, I suggested I take on the role of caregiver, but my mother dismissed the idea, citing her busy schedule. Returning home to care for my father, I found myself shouldering not only caregiving duties, but also the entire burden of household chores. Despite her initial claims of self-sufficiency, my mother had neglected the chores, leaving me overwhelmed with the responsibilities. Juggling work, caregiving, and household tasks became a daunting challenge. Meanwhile, my father, though physically weaker, expressed gratitude and apologized for the trouble. Undeterred, I reassured him and cherished the moments spent together. Despite my efforts, my mother continued to criticize, finding fault in my cooking and questioning my commitment as a daughter. Determined to address her concerns about my father's nutrition, I adjusted my approach, preparing smaller dishes to accommodate his changed appetite. After increasing the variety of dishes, my mom remained silent. A few days later, she complained that there were too many dishes in the meals, citing my parents' age and their inability to consume such quantities. She questioned my ability to save money, noting that I had been living alone until now. In response, I explained that I added more side dishes not because she instructed me to do so, but to prevent Dad from getting tired of the food and to stimulate his appetite. Mom accused me of having an attitude, as if she had been constantly nagging and undoing my efforts. Reluctantly, she moved to the sofa and demanded coffee. As I cleaned up, she threw a cushion at me, insisting I hurry up and make coffee, claiming that I'm always at home, not working, and just after Dad's retirement money. Despite my attempts to clarify that I work from home, she failed to understand. In her perception, I apparently moved back home under the pretense of taking care of Dad, without contributing to living expenses. Despite my efforts in caring for Dad, earning money for our living expenses, and managing all the housework, she believed I was misusing Dad's retirement money. Frustrated and reaching my limit, feeling sorry for Dad but unable to continue living in the same house, I accompanied him to physical therapy a few days later. The doctor's encouragement was overshadowed by the sight of Mom hastily leaving home with large bags upon our return. The next day, I discovered that all my cherished bags and accessories were gone. Confronting Mom, I questioned if she had entered my room. Justifying her actions, she claimed it was her house, and she could enter any room. I inquired about a luxury brand bag she had, criticizing her spending on such items despite advising me not to waste money. Angry and upset, I learned that she had sold my bags and accessories without consulting me. The significant amount of money was used for her own hobbies. Shouting in frustration, I demanded the return and repayment. However, my mom, transformed into a figure of anger, yelled back, unable to believe her own daughter was talking back, resembling a confrontation with a demon. During my childhood, I obediently listened to my parents and worked hard for them. Now, as an adult, I find myself taking care of them. Despite my requests for my mom to contribute in caring for Dad, she claims to be doing her part while, in reality, she is the one receiving the most care. It's disheartening to witness my dad, who has resigned himself to the lack of care from my mom, still making efforts to communicate with her, only to have her vanish when he starts talking. Lost in contemplation, I confronted my mom, who remained silent. Suddenly, she turned away from me, stormed to the kitchen, and returned with a kitchen knife, a furious expression on her face. In a fit of rage, she demanded that I leave, accusing me of being a parasitic leech, waiting for my dad's retirement money. Frustrated by the realization that my efforts and words were falling on deaf ears, I decided it was time to find a new place and swiftly move out. Slowly distancing myself from my mother, I rushed into my room when she made no attempt to follow. Despite expecting not to feel sadness due to her usual emotional distance, tears welled up, fueled by intense anger. Swiftly, I began preparations to move out. I sought assistance from a colleague at work who had connections in real estate. With their help, I quickly found a new place. During my free time, I packed my belongings into boxes. When everything was ready, I'd opened up to my dad about my mother's behavior. He expressed regret and apologized, acknowledging that he had sensed something was amiss but struggled to address it. He revealed that my mom had treated him poorly too, and he was contemplating a divorce. Grateful for my support, He thanked me and agreed with my decision to move out. A few days later, when my mom was away at her hula dance classes and lunch with friends, we seized the opportunity to move. Movers arrived on a Wednesday morning when we were confident she wouldn't be home. As our belongings were loaded onto the truck, a sense of sadness crept in. In a rented car, my dad and I embarked on our journey to escape my mom's toxic environment. He questioned if it was the right choice, suggesting I could have taken the chance to be free from caregiving. Assuring him it was the right decision, I expressed how happy living with him made me feel. The move was completed by the afternoon, and over takeout lunch we reminisced. I apologized for the convenience store lunch boxes, and my dad shared that we used to eat them often before my return. Even the simplest conversations made the meal taste delicious. After a break, we began unpacking and settling into our new life. Just as we were getting accustomed to the change, the phone rang. It was my mom. I answered the call, and my mother immediately panicked, questioning why our belongings were gone. I calmly informed her that Dad and I had made the decision to move out together. Concerned about living expenses without Dad's pension and retirement fund, she doubted our ability to afford a high-rise condo. I reassured her, explaining that I had a stable job and contributed financially to the family. However, she accused me of spending Dad's retirement fund on designer bags, despite my clarification that I had been supporting the family. I reminded her that Dad had tried to communicate my job situation to her, but she had never listened. Money was her primary concern, and her financial management was careless. Growing impatient, Dad dropped a bombshell. We were getting a divorce. Mom panicked about her living expenses, but Dad assured her that she could live freely without interference. He mentioned sending divorce papers for her to sign later and hung up without further explanation. Dad apologized for making me feel bad, and I expressed my gratitude. The next day, we headed to the hospital for Dad's appointment. Unexpectedly, we found my mother waiting near the entrance. She approached, inquiring about the previous day's phone call and asserting that she wouldn't allow us to live in a nice place by ourselves. Suddenly, she grabbed my hand, insisting on living in the high-rise too. Despite my calm demeanor, she refused to accept our decision. I asked her to let me live my own life, but she persisted, leading me to threaten calling the police. Eventually releasing her grip, she hurriedly left as hospital staff and security approached. I apologized for the commotion, attributing it to my mother's actions. A subsequent argument took place, and as I observed my mother's back near the hospital entrance, she seemed weaker than usual. In the days that followed, she tried to find us around the hospital, but only confronted people she perceived as weaker. After being chased away by security guards and assertive patients, she stopped showing up. That hospital encounter marked the last time I saw my mother. Subsequently, my father consulted a lawyer and actively pursued the divorce process. Unhappy about the divorce, my mother made a fuss demanding money. The lawyer explained alimony, but when she realized she wouldn't receive any, she resorted to tears and begging. The lawyer directed her to financial assistance centers, and the divorce process continued. Eventually, the divorce was finalized, and my father decided to sell the house. Initially opposed to the idea, my mother changed her stance upon learning she would receive money from the property division. After selling the house, our lives became more peaceful. Juggling work, caregiving, and housekeeping, I found support in daytime caregivers, and Dad's condition gradually improved. One day, my mother called, requesting money. I declined, stating that I couldn't provide more and asking her to leave us alone. Despite changing my number to stop her calls, she persisted using different numbers. Later, I heard from mutual acquaintances that she was living in a small apartment, working part-time, and barely managing on her own. Dad, upon hearing this, remarked that she had finally learned to stand on her own 2 feet. Reflecting quietly, I admitted that he might have spoiled her too much. When I asked if he was happy now, he thanked me and apologized for the trouble life had caused me.